And I'm going to introduce Bill Tittle, and then I'm going to speak for him. I'm going to be his mouthpiece. I'm going to do the talk that he wrote, as he wrote it, and I'm going to do it alongside the deck, the slides that he created on his own. And I'm going to attempt to reconstruct the thought and the feeling that went into all this. We know Bill. Bill's been our past president. He's been a leader for us at Old Guard, and he was a very successful consultant in the chemical engineering and pharmaceutical business when he's working, and he's been a civic leader and Old Guard leader since. And clearly someone who takes a thoughtful approach to life. Can we cue up his speech? And I'm going to read from the speech and match it to the presentation. Bill was talking about the idea of a personal credo, something that one believes in. And he's going to do this by talking about intellectual history, politics, science. Can we go to that's screen one. Now, the table of contents merely shows you his outline, lessons of Greek and Roman philosophy, and conclusions. And we're going to talk in a little bit about each of the different philosophical schools of the ancient world. And next slide, please. We saw an outline of today's talk. First, I'll provide an introduction. This talk will be different from those of the previous weeks when I had speakers who are experts in the field of inquiry. This week, the topic is the idea of a personal credo, what we believe about the meaning of life. I'm not an expert, but I do have a personal credo. You may not believe you have one, but you do. If push comes to shove, you'll act based on your credo. So at several points in today's talk, I'm going to ask members of the audience to offer their views. I'll provide a review of classical Greek and Roman philosophy as stimuli for your thinking about your own credo. I don't know how many people study the classics today. When I was in high school, one of our brightest students chose to study classics at Princeton. He graduated third in his entire class and had a successful law career. In the UK, classics was a popular course of study for upper-class people pursuing a career. It was seen as training people to think logically and communicate clearly. Finally, believe it or not, I'll try, with your help, to draw some conclusions. I wanted to have a theme for the 4 talks this month. The most critical elements of human existence. So I chose relationships with other people or politics for the first talk. I chose a topic of interest to us all. How is our government facilitating our staying in New Jersey when we retire? I hope you'll agree it was a pleasant exchange of views. Nice to talk about an issue without vilifying others around you. Secondly, I chose the human mind, something we all know, our conscious selves. But what is it physically? Third, I chose the physical universe in which we live. Next slide, please. Now, these 3 issues are my selection. One of the points of my presentation today is that people are extremely diverse. What is good for the goose is anathema for the gander. So I'd like to ask each of you, what has been the most baffling aspect of your lives? Pete and Joel will control the Zoom replies. Does anyone want to say to the meeting what's been the most baffling part of your life?
There it goes. One word, women.
Yes. You know, Bill promised a philosophical discussion, not a miracle.
Rich Lander,
Right.
go for it, Rich.
Understanding my own weaknesses and shortfalls. You know, I know I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, but there actually were some things I could have improved. And recognizing them was usually an embarrassing or uncomfortable situation.
So why do we have these situations? Why is it so hard to see ourselves, right?
Well, if I recognized it was a weakness, then I could fix it. I would have, but usually one of those two prevented it.
Right. Anyone else? Okay. Finally, I want to say that for this talk, I wanted to talk about our conclusions for the journey we've been on, our own lives. We've been on this journey for 60 to 100 years. With all this experience, certainly we all have reached some conclusions. My observation is that some have concluded that some other people cannot be trusted, and there is no way to know for sure who can be trusted when it may be in their interest to betray you. It's a sort of trust but verify approach. I feel this is a factor in the contemporary trend towards partisanship over a feeling of a political unity in the U.S. and that democracy is falling victim to authoritarianism. We feel safer being with people who think like us. It is too hard to try and reach compromise with people who hold different views from me. Others have concluded that if you want to experience real love, you have to put yourself at risk. I remember at my wedding, as I waited for my dear Sharon to walk down the aisle 56 and a half years ago, that a thought entered my mind that there was a real possibility she might fall in love with someone else in the future. Not because she was a selfish person, but just because love can happen that way. However, I knew I wanted to marry her, even taking that chance. In my friendship with other men, there are some I've come to trust with my life if necessary. That's me. How about you? How do you feel on this? Have you run into people who you trust completely?
Yeah, I think I'm maybe it's just my personality, but I trust most people, certainly the people around me. And certainly, the people that I've worked with over the years, by and large. And so I feel pretty good about the trust thing. Now there are certain people I trust to not do the right thing or trust to not come through on time or et cetera. But I'm a pretty trustworthy guy. Thanks.
Thank you, Mitch. I think it shows. I
Yes.
think that's part of what so many people admire about you. There is the issue of how seriously to take the conduct of your own life. I remember very distinctly a party probably 10 years ago where a relative of the host introduced himself to me and we proceeded to exchange notes about our lives. This guy had just retired to an assisted living establishment. From what he said, he appeared not to have a care in the world. He had golf on Monday, cornhole on Tuesday, and on and on. He did not read a newspaper, cared nothing for politics or anything outside of his retired living community. There was a complete aura of self-satisfaction and lack of curiosity in him. Now, this is an extreme example, but I can understand a view that I ran the rat race for 50 years. I just want to enjoy life going forward. So I want to raise the issue of personal credo. The word credo in Latin means I believe. The guy I just talked about was at one extreme. At the other extreme is someone who cannot enjoy his life because he's obsessed with figuring out what he believes about his existence. Where do some of you stand on the line between these two extremes? Does anyone want to say something about this?
This is Bill. I'd like to say something where
Okay.
that came from, because I'm definitely not like the guy at the party. He appalled me.
Right.
If anything, I am on the other extreme. When I was sort of in my 30s, I actually attempted a self-psychoanalysis. I couldn't afford a therapist, although I have done some therapy over the years when things were really troubling me. But I can't imagine anybody even trying this. You're trying to think about what was my childhood like. What? Come on, lighten up already. But for some reason, I take a life. I think you'll agree. I enjoy life.
Right.
I don't think I'm depressive, but it's really important to me that life is like a gift to me, a gift from God, and I want to leave the world a better place or do something. So that's where I think where that was coming from in this question.
Oh, I think we can all respond to that. And as we get older, we're all thinking about what are we leaving behind for sure. Can I have the next slide, please? People have been pondering these lessons since the beginning of time. One of the interesting conclusions on life from the far past came in Greece following the reign of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great conquered more or less the entire known world at the time. The 4th century BC, from Italy to India, including most of the Middle East and North Africa. When he conquered these countries, he established new capital cities. What struck Alexander was the diversity of the local cultures, which adopted the Greek language, but retained much diversity in custom and beliefs. Moreover, Greek governors often married local women who influenced their thinking. This was known as the Hellenic world. So what were the leading philosophers in the Hellenic world saying about life? Many of you have been exposed to Plato and Aristotle. Plato can be described as an idealist, while Aristotle was more of an empiricist. I want to talk about 4 other schools of philosophy that I believe speak more to us today. Next slide, please. The Cynics. First, there were the Cynics. After the fall of Athens to Sparta in 404 BC, there was a wide rejection of all social conventions. The key question was, how does a civilized person live in an insecure, unstable, and dangerous world? Now, that resonates with me. Cynics were the dropouts of their day. I do not know anyone I know in the old guard I would describe as a dropout, but the cynic credo might resonate with some of you. The founder of cynicism, Antisthenes, 445 to 365 BC, was a disciple of Socrates and a contemporary of Plato. He was brought up in an aristocratic family, but evolved to a simple life, dressing like a day laborer, living among the poor and proclaiming a belief in no government, no private property, no marriage, and no religion. His protege, Diogenes, 404 to 325 BC, more aggressively flouted all conventions and deliberately shocked people by not washing or even dressing, and if he dressed, it was in filthy rags. He lived in a burial urn. His life so paralleled that of a dog. It was the root of the term cynic, from the Greek word cynikos, meaning like a dog. Again, none of us at Old Guard lived like this, and cynics had a positive belief in virtue. Diogenes is so popular that Alexander the Great visited him, asking what he could do for Diogenes. Diogenes famously replied, "You can stand out of my light." Diogenes considered himself a citizen of the world, and this was the basis of the term cosmopolitan. The next slide, please. And one. The second school of Greek thought to develop at this time were the skeptics. They were the first relativists. There was a long tradition of skepticism in Greece. Xenophanes, 560-478 BCE, argued that we can always learn more. Socrates said the only thing he knew was that he knew nothing, but felt knowledge was possible and its pursuit worthwhile. Pyrrho, 365-270, was the first major figure to adopt skepticism fully. He had served as a soldier in Alexander's army as far as India. He saw close at hand the great diversity of people and their values. He also learned things were not always as they appeared. So he concluded he should stop worrying and just go with the flow. That is, follow the practices and customs wherever he happened to be. Potentially dangerous if you happen to be in Nazi Germany or Salem, Massachusetts in the wrong century. He was followed by Arcelaus, 314 to 270 BC. He became the leader of Plato's Academy and was famous for arguing both sides of an issue. Skeptics continued to lead the academy for the next 2 centuries. More recent skeptics include a Scotsman, David Hume, 1711-1776. He believed we have to make choices in order to live. He was an empiricist. Only through experience can anything outside our lives be ultimately derived. Yet no one can observe himself. So when we introspect, it is sensory experiences, thoughts, emotions, memories, and these are all fleeting. Therefore, there is no experience in self, just bundles of sensations. Causation is basic to both philosophy and science. When it comes to the self or God, for that matter, we have to be able to point to excuse me, observable evidence to prove our existence, and there is none. To summarize, skeptics believe that certainty is impossible at the level of argument, demonstration, or proof. Valid arguments are proved using premises which are assumed. If P, then Q. May we have the next slide, please? In addition, there were two new philosophies in ancient Greece. Epicurus, 341 to 270, founded the school of thought that bears his name. They were the earliest scientists and liberal humanists. Their goal was to liberate us from fear, not only of death, but the fear of life. It taught people to seek happiness and fulfillment. It spoke of living unknown, since its ideas were in conflict with the broader culture that sought fame and glory. It was a fully developed philosophy, speaking of atoms as the simplest particle of all matter, including people, that could be combined into compounds, but would over time return to its original form. Death was nothing to fear. When we die, we are just gone. Epicureans were advised to have nothing to do with violence, but withdrew into private communities of like-minded people. They were to enjoy pleasure in moderation, and no non-injurious activity was prohibited. Their communities were open to women, no surprise, but also to slaves. Their philosophy, in some senses, was very similar to today's science and liberal humanism, with the possible exception that anything goes. This philosophy was contained in a book on the nature of things, De Rerum Natura, by the Roman Lucretius, 95 to 52. The poet was so obsessed with achieving salvation, and then he ultimately committed suicide. In the Middle Ages, Epicureanism almost died out from the objections of Christians, but was rediscovered in the 16th and 17th centuries. Next slide, please. Stoics. Finally, there were the Stoics. This was the governing philosophy of the Roman Empire. It was founded by Zeno, a citizen of Cyprus, not to be confused with the Socratic philosopher Zeno of Elea. It held that there was no higher authority than reason. By unpacking the consequences of that belief, we can arrive at most of the major tenets of Stoicism. First, the world as our reason presents it to us as beings, that is, the world of nature, is all the reality there is. There is nothing higher. And nature is governed by rationally intelligible principles. The spirit of rationality to them views us and it, and that is to say everything, is what is meant by God. As such, God is not outside the world, but within it. Because we are part of nature, when we die, there is nowhere else to go. It is through the ethics evolved from this belief that Stoicism achieved its greatest impact and influence. Because nature is governed by rational principles, there's a reason why everything is as it is. We cannot change it, nor should we, and it is best to accept it. Insofar as our emotions rebel, they are wrong. Emotions are cognitive judgments, either true or false. People that adopted Stoicism were often able to survive life's vicissitudes with calm and dignity, but even for them, there might come a time when they might not care to go on. For example, personal ruin or disgrace. The best writings on Stoicism are given to us by Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. Stoicism had a profound impact on Christianity, which developed around the same time. It provided a philosophical framework that influenced early Christian thinkers, stressing moral virtues, universal brotherhood, inner transformation, endurance in suffering, and the pursuit of ethical living. Next slide, please. This is the first time I've mentioned religious belief. These are very personal and not often mentioned at Old Guard. But full disclosure, I must admit that I'm a product of the Judeo-Christian culture and a believer in Christianity. I have found mysteries in life, such as people who are willing to give their lives to defend their country or love those less privileged than themselves as noble. I admit that the institution of Christianity has done dreadful things for which all Christians should be ashamed. However, all beliefs have followers who have fallen short of its tenets. Conclusions. I've only scratched the surface of philosophy. I'm no expert, but I find the philosophy of the Greeks and Romans are a good starting point. I do not mean to say that the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, in the 19th and 20th century do not add a great deal to what the Greeks and Romans taught us. This is a list of well-known philosophers and modern philosophers. And if you'd like to refer to this, it's available from us, or it will be put up shortly and available on our website. If we did an AI search of important contemporary philosophers, this list will not grab you like some of the self-help books can. But for me, the pursuit is worth the work. For those who study science, you run into brick walls of comprehension. But I still remember a preface to my thermodynamics text. He argued that when you study something difficult like thermodynamics, the first time you do it, your comprehension will be shallow, low, and perhaps non-existent. But the second time through, you'll learn more. Life is a marathon. We have many more days ahead. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And why don't we open the floor to comments and questions? And if Bill wants to deal with them, he will. Otherwise, we'll write them down and find a way to deal with it. So do we have any questions?
Let's see. Well, I think what I said was self-explanatory. I hope it will give you some food for thought. And although these ideas are pretty heavy, I was thinking about well, some of the modern philosophers that you may have heard of, like Immanuel Kant. He was a German in the 19th, or no, he's earlier than that. But his writing is incredibly dense and off-putting. But his ideas are very, very helpful. And happily, just recently, I came across an article in the New York Times by a woman, a Harvard PhD, very bright woman, and ended up over in Europe. That article made Kant's thought really useful and readable. So if you keep your mind open, you can come across some things that are really insightful. Rationality is great, but for me in my life, rationality is not everything. There are mysteries. What I found, mysteries in life that I can't explain everything rationally. And emotions, I disagree with the Stoics. Emotions should not be just suppressed. Sometimes emotions can unleash insights about yourself and life that are very much worth pursuing. I see Bob has his hand up. I don't know if there's a pass, but Bob, take it away.
You can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I would have to say that first, thank you for putting this on the agenda. It's probably the most important topic that anybody could ever speak about. And I would have to say that I probably would align myself more with Bill's personal perspective than any other. I a couple of weeks ago enjoyed listening to Dr. Potok's lecture on the physics of consciousness. And that led me to get up and ask him a question about assumptions. And it seems to me that since the Enlightenment, where we have had a kind of a separation between what was once together, that is philosophy and science, they kind of separated, and people have left philosophy kind of behind. And we tend to think of ourselves as a brilliant society now focused on science. But we have forgotten that our science, just like our philosophy, is based on certain assumptions, and that assumptions are things that are believed, like a credo, that are not proven. And I asked Dr. Potok if there were some other assumptions that could be employed to help physics over the past 100 years, which seems to have been stuck in terms of coming up with new ideas about how the world works, as evidenced by the fact that we have two very effective theories about the world. One is Einstein's theory of general relativity, which describes space-time, and the other being quantum mechanics, which is the physics of the very small, which for 100 years now, as I mentioned, have not been able to be reconciled with one another. So one or the other are both, or both, are either incomplete or somehow wrong. So then I said, since the Dr. Potok's lecture was on the theory of the physics of consciousness, whether or not anyone was working on an assumption where maybe physics, instead, the consciousness, instead of being an outgrowth of physics as an assumption, that perhaps physics was an outgrowth of consciousness as a contrary assumption. And his answer was that there was no evidence for that. Which I didn't take it further, but which I would now respond to say would be, but doctor, there's no evidence for any assumption. That's what an assumption is. And it leads me to believe that most scientists today, because of the way they have to live their lives, get funding for what it is they're doing, are educated into a mold where the standard assumptions are not questioned. I asked Perplexity AI this morning what it says the underlying assumptions for modern physics are, and it came up with a list of 10 categories. I'll read you a few. Quantum field theory, it says, assumes that particles are excitations of underlying quantum fields that permeate space-time. Now, this is an AI that says that's an assumption. To go on, the standard model of particle physics, it says, assumes the existence of quarks, leptons, and force-carrying bosons as the fundamental constituents of matter. That, this AI says, an assumption. I agree completely. It's an assumption. It's a credo. General relativity, it assumes that gravity is a consequence of the curvature of space, another assumption. That dark matter and dark energy. I personally would describe these as fudge factors to make our physics today work a little better based on the observations that we're making, which don't fit our theories. It calls it a hypothetical form of matter and energy. Hypothetical, is fudge factor. And it also lists as assumptions the existence of fundamental constants, such as the speed of light, Planck's constant, and the gravitational constant. So I say, now is the time to think more critically about our assumptions, our scientific assumptions, since we are kind of abandoning the notion that there's anything that exists. There's nothing that exists outside of the physical nature. And I think it's time to abandon that and go back to a broader range of questioning. And one such avenue of investigation might be to posit that physical nature is a consequence of something that is not material. And I would say that rather than to try to figure out how consciousness arises from physical nature, that maybe some people should be working on, and I know that they are, how physical nature might in fact arise from what's more fundamental, which we could call consciousness. And so then I said my piece.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Terrific, Bob.
Thank you very much. That's a very well thought out. And we have Al Aho. Can we hear from you?
Well, first, I'd like to congratulate Bill on putting together a talk that is truly profound.
Right.
And reflects many of my views that I've developed over my years on the question of what is the meaning of life and why are we here? And having studied computer science and mathematics, I've learned that there are problems that have no solutions. And one of the conclusions I've come to is that perhaps asking the question, what is the meaning of life, has no solution. Just the same way as Alan Turing showed that there are problems that have no algorithmic solutions, and Gödel showed that there are always theorems that can't be proven in any axiomatization of mathematics. So I think it's a wonderful feeling to know that there are problems that may not have any solutions, but that there are an infinity of problems for which we can find solutions. So extending our current knowledge, but never getting the whole shebang is where I stand in my personal philosophy at this point. But Bill, thank you for a very enlightening and illuminating talk.
Mitch, do you want to speak?
Okay, now I got unlocked. First of all, as echoing everybody else, thank you, Bill, for a great talk, and thank you, Pete, for being the narrator there. That was great, and it's hard to imitate Bill, but you did a good job. So keeping on this general thought process, if you go back, let's say 400 years ago, whenever you couldn't explain something, you just immediately invoked God. Okay. And you had Adam and Eve, that was how we all got started. God controlled the earth and the animals and the humans and everything like a great giant puppeteer, et cetera, et cetera. And for those of us who are more on the secular side of things in the 21st century, we have another tool at our disposal called the skyhook. Skyhooks are great things. If you got a skyhook, you can lift anything, anywhere, and you can maneuver stuff around, and it's just a great tool. And so whether it's God, skyhooks, or something else, eventually, like Bob was saying, you go back far enough in, you peel the onion far enough, and eventually you get to the point where the only answer is God or a skyhook. And we saw that with the origin of the universe. Okay, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until we get to a singularity, and you get to infinite mass, infinite energy, and somebody calls bullshit. All right, so, and we've had several talks this month on where you just get to the point where there isn't an answer. And on one hand, that leaves us open to a lot of speculation. And one particular piece of speculation that I'll put out there is, particularly in all these profound physics things, whether it's quantum mechanics or astrophysics or cosmology or whatever, what we know in 2024 is so much vastly improved upon what we knew in 1924, and what we'll be looking at in 2124. And unless somebody comes up with a miracle cure, none of us will be around for that. But maybe we can use this skyhook to live longer. I don't know. But the point is, at some point, first of all, you have to recognize there's a limit to how much we know and how much we're just, convincing ourselves we know enough to answer all these questions. And secondly, at some point, you just say, who cares? And I'm going to live my life the way I'm going to live it. And I'm going to worry about more important things like the debate on Thursday. Anyway, I'll shut up now before I get in trouble. But thanks again. And this is something of all the meetings we've had in however many years, 4 years now, this is the one that really demands us being in the room together so we can have a better interaction. This is not a good Zoom venue. So anyway, thanks a lot, and Anybody needs a skyhook, let me know. We'll have a further conversation on that topic.
Is anyone else?
Steve Farley.
Okay, thank you, Joel, and let me make this unanimous by complimenting Bill on tackling an extremely ambitious subject. This is a huge challenge, and you and your voice pulled it off very beautifully. In particular, I would tell you that when you're considering cosmic questions like what is the meaning of life, I think you are absolutely right to go back to the Romans and the Greeks and to their philosophers. I think that is the right starting point. In my early school days, I had the privilege of studying the classics and also having multiple philosophy courses in college, anywhere from the pre-Socratics, up through Wittgenstein and also the existentialists. And when I try and think about questions such as the ones you've posed, it seems to me that exposure was far more valuable than all of the economics and financial and mathematics courses that I could possibly take. So I think you're on the right track. That is the way to go. And this is just a little bit personal, but it's funny how you can derive so much from them. Whenever I'm up early in the morning, not as often as I used to be, and I look out and I see the early morning sky, the word that comes to mind is rhododactylos. That was the word that Homer used to describe the morning. It literally means rosy-fingered.
Right.
What a beautiful way to think about the dawn. And there's so much wisdom in the ancients, and I think you're absolutely on track to start there.
Great, Steve.
Anybody else like to offer? Pardon me. With that, I think there's no question this has been really the most meaningful series that I can remember in a long time for each of us individually. And I hope that each of us can take some of it away from us and look at each rosy-fingered dawn as it comes up in the future. But for now, could we have the certificates? Well, we have certificate of appreciation, virtual. There is a real certificate, though, behind this virtual certificate. Okay. There's only one thing. I think, Bill, could you have your bedroom redone in orchids in tribute to the old guard? We would like to thank you, Bill, for a brilliant month, a brilliant series, and for the courage, the intellectual courage to show us what you think and to invite our participation. And I think that stands at the highest level of what old guard can be and what we offer to each other. And I'd like to have an old guard salute. I don't know how we do it. I think I'm going to put up some hands.